Thank you to you at home as well for sticking around for the next hour. Rachel has the night off. Today on the floor of the United States Senate, the top Democrat, Harry Reid, said something that he doesn't normally say. He said something that is kind of unusual, actually. He said, you know what, why don't I just play it?
That is poppycock.
He said poppycock. The reason that Harry Reid said the totally awesome word poppycock on the Senate floor today was because he and the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, were trading jabs back and forth about which side is to blame for nothing getting done in the Senate this year. And when Mitch McConnell blamed that on the Democrats, well, out came...
That is poppycock.
That is awesome. What happened in the Senate today, aside from the poppycock reference, was something truly remarkable. In a chamber that has been essentially paralyzed by filibuster after filibuster on nearly everything over the last 2 years, there were 2 votes held in the Senate today that were not filibuster, that only needed a simple majority to pass, 51 votes to pass, just like the founders intended. And these weren't meaningless votes. We weren't naming postal offices here. These were votes of consequence. It was about what to do when the Bush tax cuts expire at the end of the year. Democrats and Republicans each got the chance to put up their own plan for a popular vote in the Senate and to see what happened. Republicans went first. Their bill would have extended the Bush tax cuts for everyone, including all income among millionaires and billionaires. That bill failed. It was defeated by 9 votes, including 2 Republicans who crossed party lines to vote against it. Then it was the Democrats' turn. The plan from Senate Democrats was to extend the Bush tax cuts for all income up to $250,000. So everybody keeps their tax cuts on that income. But millionaires and billionaires lose their tax cut on income over $250,000. So they keep it on the $250,000. They lose it above that. And hey, look at that. The Democratic bill actually passed. It passed the Senate by a vote of 51 to 48. Vice President Joe Biden was even on hand to gavel the bill through, marking the historic occasion of the Senate kind of working. So this was really a remarkable turn of events. The Senate was functional today. It went as it was supposed to go. Both sides put up their plans, and in the end, one side prevailed. In this case, it was the Democrats. The only thing is there's a little catch I need to tell you about. The reason Republicans allowed that vote today, the reason they didn't filibuster like they usually do, is because there is a rule in the Constitution which says that any bill relating to taxes must originate in the House. It has to begin in the House. It cannot begin in the Senate. And this bill did not originate in the House. And that is why McConnell didn't filibuster. He said, quote, "The only reason we won't block it today, the bill, is that we know it doesn't pass constitutional muster and won't become law. What today's votes are all about is showing the people who sent us here where we stand." Okay, so if you thought even for a minute that the Senate was actually doing something today, well, poppycock. There's McConnell to remind you that it was all just posturing. Thank you, Mitch McConnell. Meanwhile, what exactly was happening over in the House today?
I would ask the gentleman from Virginia if he would be willing, or let me rephrase that, he would not object to a unanimous consent in the House to make a correction in what was clearly a typographical error made by nonpartisan professional staff at the alleged counsel's office.
Madam Chairman, this member will reserve the right to object at the appropriate time.
Reclaiming my time, nothing could be more insincere than to pick on professional staff on a typographical error.
What you just saw there were House Democrats and House Republicans fighting over whether a typo in a bill could be fixed or not. I wish I was kidding. I am not kidding. So that was Congress today. The Senate voted on a pair of totally meaningless bills. The House fought about a typo. And if any of this comes as a surprise to you, you probably have not been paying close enough attention. Because this is not just a bad Congress, or even a pretty bad Congress. I think the case can, should, and probably must be made that this is one of the worst Congresses we have ever had in this country. And I know people say stuff like that all the time. It just sounds like hyperbole. But I think I can prove it. We've got the numbers here. I think there's convincing evidence that this particular Congress, the 112th Congress, is one of the worst of all time. Let us begin with just the simplest measure of how much Congress is getting done, congressional productivity. It is the number of laws they have passed, public laws they have passed. This graph right here shows the number of public laws passed by every Congress dating back to the 80th Congress in 1947. That Congress, by the way, was a Congress Harry Truman called the Do-Nothing Congress. As you can see, it varies every year, but it's generally in the many hundreds. Ready for this Congress? Yeah, that's it. That tiny little bar over there on the right, the one with the arrow. Now, to be fair, there are still 5 months left in this session. But at this rate, the 112th Congress is on track to be by far the least productive Congress in modern times. It is the do less than the do nothing Congress. That sort of legislative ineptitude has also led the 112th Congress to become the single most despised Congress of all time in the eyes of the public. Democratic Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado put together this handy graph, which shows that this particular Congress is less popular than the IRS, the airline industry, lawyers, less popular than Richard Nixon during Watergate, than the banks in the oil and gas industry, than BP during the Gulf oil spill, than Paris Hilton. This Congress is less popular than communism and Hugo Chavez. The only thing less popular than Congress, Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. And he's not even much less popular. On top of being historically inept and historically unpopular, there is also the matter of this Congress doing real, measurable damage to the country. Do you remember the debt ceiling debacle last year when Republicans took the country to the brink of default for the very first time? That wasn't just an ugly political fight. That had real-world consequences. This is what monthly job growth looked like last year. Looks a little uneven there in the middle, right? It drops very far. After starting the year off pretty strong, job growth essentially fell off a cliff beginning in May, which was right around the time Speaker John Boehner kicked off the debt ceiling fight. As Congress debated whether America was going to pay its bills or not, hiring slowed. Then, look at that, once that fight was over, the very next month, hiring picked up again immediately. Here's how the debt ceiling fight affected consumer confidence in the economy. These are Gallup numbers. You see that big drop in the middle of 2011? That right there is the debt ceiling fight. And it is a huge drop. So by having this useless, petulant fight over the debt ceiling, Congress tanked consumer confidence. They effectively slowed down job growth. And, oh yeah, if you remember, we as a country lost our AAA credit rating for the first time in our history. We just learned this week, by the way, that the debt ceiling fight has so far cost U.S. taxpayers $1.3 billion in extra borrowing costs also. So thank you, 112th Congress, for that, too. This Congress has been so incompetent, it can barely even keep the lights on in its own building, and I mean that literally. Every year, Congress has to pass 12 annual appropriations bills to keep the government funded. That has to happen by October 1st. As you can see, some sessions of Congress are a lot more successful at doing this than others. The average Congress gets 3 appropriations bills passed on time. I said this Congress is bad. I didn't say others were good. Now, can we show how the 112th Congress did last year? That is not a graphics mistake. That is a 0. This Congress passed exactly 0 appropriations bills on time last year. Great. Now, one particular department of the federal government got it the worst. After Democrats and Republicans failed to reach a compromise last year, the Federal Aviation Administration shut down. In the middle of a weak economy, 4,000 FAA workers and 70,000 airport construction workers were furloughed from their jobs. They were out of pay and out of work until Congress finally managed to get its act together. This is not normal. This is not how it is supposed to work. This Congress has not only been historically unproductive, it has taken steps that have directly harmed the country, that have directly harmed our economic recovery. And it's not just people like me who think this. It is the most credentialed experts on the matter. Thomas Mann and Norm Ornstein are perhaps the most respected scholars of Congress in Washington, period. They've been studying and defending and explaining and advocating for the institution for more than 4 decades. And earlier this year, they came to this joint conclusion, quote, "We have been studying Washington politics and Congress for more than 40 years, and never have we seen them this dysfunctional." Joining me now, the aforementioned most credentialed experts on the matter, Norm Ornstein, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and Tom Mann, senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institution, also the co-authors of It Is Even Worse Than It Looks, How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. Thank you guys both for being here.
I'm happy to be with you, Ezra.
Norm, let's begin. The book does something that I think is fairly courageous, given that you guys have built up a lot of bipartisan credibility over the years. And you say that what has gone wrong in this Congress, in large part, is that one of the two parties has become extreme. The Republicans have simply dropped off a cliff and come to see the basic values of governing, like compromise, as anathema. Is that what's going on here? Is that a correct assessment of your thesis?
It is, Ezra, and you're right. It would have been much easier for us to say everybody does it, a plague on both their houses. But that's not the reality now. And we know it not just because we kind of see it or we have some anecdotes that would express it. In many ways, some of the Republican leaders have provided the evidence directly for us. In particular, Mitch McConnell, who often has strange bursts of damaging candor.
Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader.
The Senate minority leader. And, of course, not only said the very famous now, my number one goal is to make Barack Obama a one-term president, but basically made it clear after the midterm elections that, of course, we weren't going to cooperate with the Democrats. If these things looked even bipartisan at all, they would have benefited from them. So there was an obvious strategy to block, to make any victories look ugly. And we also know now, Dave Obey, the former chairman of the Appropriations Committee, when they started to do a stimulus bill, called in his ranking Republican member, Jerry Lewis, and said, we want to work with you. Go to your members. Let us know what things you would like, what things you don't like. And Lewis laughed and said, I've got orders from on high. We are not going to cooperate. There are smoking guns here all over the place.
Tom, I look at what's happening here, and I agree with you guys. I think the Republican Party has become very extreme. But I also see a large historic trend towards polarization. The parties getting further apart from each other. One thing you guys say is that there is a mismatch between polarized parties that kind of act as disciplined units and the rules of, in particular, the Senate, but Congress more generally. And so when I look at this, it seems to me that the first thing to do is to get rid of what we call in this show the Tarantino, but which in the broader world is known as the filibuster. Is that wrong? Am I barking up the wrong
Well,
ear?
there's no question that we have a mismatch. Our parties are now parliamentary style, ideologically polarized, internally unified, and vehemently oppositional. Now, listen, if Mitch McConnell or John Boehner led the opposition party in a parliament and were as aggressive and anti-negotiation as they have been, who cares? The majority puts its program into place and is held accountable. But in this system, a minority party can frustrate the majority, and the key to that is the Senate filibuster, which, as you have written, is an accidental element of Senate procedure. It occurred early in the 19th century when the motion to on the previous question was left out of the rules. But that filibuster, which was used selectively, carefully, in full public view for many decades, has now become a routine 60-vote hurdle that allows a minority that can muster 41 votes over the long haul to frustrate any effort of that majority party. If they were willing to deal, if the filibuster requirements set up the incentives to find some agreement between the two parties, it'd be okay. But they decided on day one they were not going to negotiate on anything. It would be Obama's economy, and we wouldn't have our fingerprints on it.
And what worries me about that, Norm, is that, we just spent a fair amount of time in this segment explaining a weird quirk of congressional procedure today. Now, most Americans are normal human beings and correctly do not spend their time paying attention to Congress. So I really worry about the breakdown of accountability in our elections when voters begin blaming the majority, be they Republican or Democrat, for essentially outcomes that are dictated by minority obstruction. I mean, if you had no filibuster, you'd had much more stimulus, a very different health care bill. But instead, the broad mass of voters get very angry because Congress isn't working and they blame the majority. But Congress tends to not work often because of the minority.
One of the troubling things here, Ezra, is you could go back to the 1994 midterm elections when a similar process of obstruction took place with the Newt Gingrich-led Republicans against Bill Clinton. And this It worked like a charm in 1994. Obstruction worked even more like a charm in 2010. What Republicans learned in both cases is if you get people frustrated enough, they just vote the ins out and the outs in. And now we're in a situation with divided government where people are even angrier, where you have a Congress that is in much worse repute even than the last one. Where are voters to turn? Figuring out who to hold accountable is fuzzy now, and it's perhaps the biggest problem we have given the way the parties are operating. They not only gridlock and do great damage, as you say, and it really is damage to the country, the fabric of the economy, but they leave voters with little opportunity to figure out who genuinely to blame. And frankly, the press corps is an unindicted co-conspirator in all of this.
I cop guilty to that. Norm Ornstein of the American Enterprise Institute and Tom Mann of the Brookings Institution, co-authors of It Is Even Worse Than It Looks, which I have read and is terrific, and you guys should all check out. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Ezra.
Thanks, Ezra.
Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney has a bone to pick with President Obama's foreign policy. At least he says he does. In fact, he says it all the time. It's just not clear exactly what that bone is. That is next. And Kim Jong-un of North Korea has taken a bride, but that is not the best new thing in the world today. That distinction belongs to the reporting of Lil Kim's big announcement by a journalist both revered and beloved by The Rachel Maddow Show. Stay tuned.